What is the worst, weirdest favor a friend has ever asked you for? Coworker asked me to help him bury a body. Turns out his grandfather was to be buried on their farm and I was the only guy he knew who can use a backhoe. Even weirder, his grandfather wasn't dead yet, and not only was he walking around and talking, he brought us out iced tea and Diet Coke while we dug his grave. He died like 5 days later. Not something a friend asked of me, but something a friend offered to help with. Had a lingering smell of rotten sewage in the house. Was a bit short on money at the time, so I called a buddy who can fix anything to see if he could figure it out. He identifies the issue right away and crawls under my house to find a previous owner used Drano and must have not done a proper flush, so it ate away the main sewer pipe. At least 6 months of shit, piss, and food was built up that was probably 4 inches deep. He went to his truck to put on his boiler suit and crawled through my girlfriend's and my shit for 2 hours replacing the rotted pipe. I was down there with him trying to help however I could, but he pretty much did the repair solo. Every time he encountered a thick chunk of poo, he would yell up through the crawl hole that my girlfriend should ease off on the corn. Didn't faze him one bit, and he wouldn't accept any form of payment even though I insisted I had to repay him somehow. Best friend I've ever had. This isn't the only example I could give about how great of a friend he is, but definitely the wildest. Dan the man. You the real MVP if you ever see this. Back in the old days. Had a paranoid friend pay me good money to rent out and dupe porn VHS tapes because he didn't want a record of him renting them out. His logic. If he ever became famous, he didn't want a record of him renting out porn tapes. Postscript. He never became famous. Walked in on my boss in the men's room. He pleaded with me to help detach his sack from his zipper. I got him free. So much blood. We never spoke of it again. My best friend is a huge guy. He's 6'9" and 250 pounds. But he's incredibly scared of ghosts. And he believes there's ghosts in his house. Even though I've assured him numerous times there are not. Every time he has to go in his basement. He calls me to come to his house, he lives alone, to go into his basement with him while he does whatever he needs to do down there, like getting stuff out of storage, flipping an electrical breaker, etc. Even if he only has to go down there for a minute or two. We're in our 20s. And as funny as I think it is, every time he calls me to come with him to his basement, I always show up anyways because that's what friends are for. You would never think such a huge man would be so deathly scared to go in his basement alone. But I love him to death regardless. I was friends with a girl through junior high and high school. We called one another best friends. But in truth she was just a shitty person and a worse friend. We drifted apart as you do after we graduated as I went to college. And she made other choices. One day out of the blue she called me and invited me to meet her for lunch to catch up and blah blah. As we're eating lunch, she tells me a fun story about an awesome party she and her new friend group were at, and oh by the way, would I be her alibi for that night because they'd managed to burn down the house they were partying at, which they'd illegally entered in the first place. I refused to get involved and told her while I wouldn't volunteer any information. I also would not lie to any official that asked me outright about anything to do with that incident. She wasn't happy with me. But no officials ever came to me with questions. She and I had even less to do with one another after that. Oh. And I paid for lunch. Mine is pretty SFW. He wanted me to buy a house so that he and his newly knocked up girlfriend could have a place to live together for free. I had a hard enough time paying for my apartment. I have no idea why he thought I had the money to buy a freaking house. He didn't ask just once. Either. He would send me house listings all the time and try to schedule tours. I think he truly believed I just needed to see some houses in person. In order to be convinced. He stopped speaking to me after I moved out of state and didn't invite them to join me. I have absolutely no remorse. Edit. A lot of you are asking for more context. So I'll repost a reply I made in another comment. I'd known him since we were kids and he had a history of leeching off of others. Lots of "could you spot me?" meals that never get repaid and stuff like that. His whole family was like that. Actually. As kids. He came over to our house for dinner hundreds of times. But I had only ever been invited to stay for dinner by his parents once or twice. I think he had just gotten away with that type of behavior for so long that he thought it was normal. That getting stuff out of others was just a part of friendship. And that his company was repayment enough. I had probably mentioned wishing I owned a house once. In passing. And he took that as an invitation to move in with me whenever I got one. It's been over 10 years since that time and I still don't own a house. Getting a girl pregnant just added urgency to his weak plot. He and that girl ended up getting married, shotgun style. But I wasn't invited. I dodged a bullet. Though. Because I heard from other friends that they tried to get their wedding party to pool their money together to pay for the whole thing. The only person I feel bad for is their child. Having to grow up with those kinds of parents. I became friends with a female coworker as I was dating a guy who was friends with her boyfriend at the time. She had this weird thing about not pooping around him to the point when they eventually did long distance she would visit him for the weekend and hold it in the entire time. We planned a trip together and shared a hotel room with all four of us. While her and I were getting ready to go out, she pulled me aside and told me she had to poop so bad but didn't want to be in the bathroom alone because everyone would know she was pooping. She asked me to stay in the bathroom with her while she took a shit so it would just seem like we were doing our makeup. I kid you not. That shit stank so bad that I'm 100% sure the guy smelled it in the room anyways and we both just looked like weirdos who shit together. RIP. I walked past my brother at somebody's house and he leans over and says, "Gently step on the purple pig." I was like WTF and kept walking. Then I see this little rubber pig laying in the dirt so I gently stepped on it like he said and it made this delightful little snort. So I chuckled and kept walking. Several years ago, a friend asked me to help him move his ex-wife's stuff out of the barracks he was living in. According to him, she had gone missing a few months prior without any notice and just vanished. He would have normally been able to empty her stuff out by himself. But he had a broken ankle and arm from a personal accident. So I and another friend accepted his request for help. While moving her stuff, what we saw when we opened up the trunk of his car, he was still inside due to his injuries, made us both stop and take pause. Re-evaluating the missing wife story he told us. Inside the trunk was rope, duct tape, gloves, garbage bags, and 4 one-gallon containers of barbecue sauce. My buddy turned to me and asks playfully, but with a hint of seriousness, "Hey man, did Jacob eat his wife?" We finished packing the car awkwardly. We had to pull him aside later and ask him what the fuck? His response? "I just like barbecue sauce." His wife showed up several weeks later. Turns out she ran off with a person she met while playing World of Warcraft. People are weird. Neighbor asked if they could put a dead rat in our bin because they didn't want to put it in theirs. My cousin had locked his keys in his car. And it would cost too much to get someone to open the car. So he asked me to break into his car and steal his keys because the insurance of getting a window fixed would have been cheaper. Called at 2 a.m. asking me to reach him on a well-hidden countryside road. Told me to bring a shovel and the biggest plastic bag I had. Driving a scooter while holding a shovel isn't easy. Also, I was expecting to help burying a human corpse, so I brought 2 bags big enough for me to fit in. The idiot just drove over a chinchilla. A fucking chinchilla. I still can't figure where did it came from. One of my roommates in college begged me to take a picture of my bare back for an art project she was working on. Keep in mind, she was not an art student. Nor in an art class. Nor an artist. I was uncomfortable with it but eventually agreed to do it. She showed me the final work and she had taken several pictures of people's backs. Made them kind of translucent and then layered them on top of each other. I didn't really get it. But she was very happy with herself. A guy the first was dating for 2 months asked me to have sex with one of his friends so we could get free Disneyland tickets. My date worked at Disneyland. He wanted to take me into the park but he didn't want to use one of his free tickets that he was saving for a family member. So he literally asked me to have sex with a coworker of his to get one of his tickets. It didn't work out between us. Edit. Since so many people are asking. Yes, I bonked his coworker for the park hopper tickets LMAO. The relationship was very unsteady before this and we broke up within the weeks after. The coworker was very hot though. So I don't feel bad. If he wasn't I wouldn't have done it. Not a friend. But a kid back in high school asked if he could borrow my phone to watch porn during class. I told him no, obviously, and he said, "Come on man. It's not like I'm going to jack off. I just want to watch it." I asked why he didn't use his own phone and he said, "Because it might get taken away." So you're gonna get mine taken away? You're already going to get in trouble. It doesn't matter whose fucking phone it is. Also, why the fuck would I want to get involved? He set fire to an apartment building a few weeks later. My friend had been dating this girl for a few months. He started thinking she was attracted to me. After he said that, I paid closer attention to her behavior when she was around me. It was kinda flirty. Anyway, he asked me to hit on her and see how she responded. So I flirted back here and there. I could tell she really liked it. One day I got all serious and asked her to come over and hang out one day when he was at work. I think I worded it like, I've really wanted to ask you something lately. Do you want to hang out at my place while friend is at work tomorrow? She eagerly accepted. Of course I didn't meet up with her, but I did report all this back to him. He can't stand drama. He just broke it off with her. Said he didn't see their relationship going anywhere. She tried calling, texting me. I just told her we've been friends a long time and it wouldn't be right. I don't think she has a clue about what actually happened. I don't usually ask for anything. But I was hungry. While I was at work, I asked my friend to go get my food that my mom prepared. At my parents' home. He said sure and left. My friend was visiting me at work and I took the chance to ask him to get me a plate. He came back and brought me a dish of his own. He cooked a bacon, grilled cheese sandwich for me. This is not the weirdest experience that I've had. But it's his. I asked him, why didn't you get the food that my mother made? At my parents' place? He misheard me and thought I asked him to make me food. Best laugh that we had. To unbury his boat, no other information was given. I said yes, and turns out he thought that burying his boat in one of our cornfields would help protect it over the winter because it wouldn't get snowed on cause it underground. While on a business trip, a coworker asked me to come to her hotel room, comb on her back, and rub it in like lotion. To go downstairs to the lower level of a church and take a picture of her daughter in her coffin before the funeral home came and took her away. I know it's not the worst thing, but it freaked me out. Kind of came out of nowhere. Thank goodness for friend doctor who heard the request. Turned around and said I'll do it. To donate my sperm. To her. An ex. No joke. My buddy called me in a panic. They were being followed by an all-black Cadillac. They don't know why, but they couldn't see the driver. They tried losing the Cadillac, but it was still tailing them. He calls me asking if he could drive to our house and we would be waiting there to help them. He was so scared and our other friend was with him and almost in tears. We told him to come over and we'd be ready with shovels or whatever we had. We were 18 at the time. The kicker was, we were the ones in the Cadillac. My buddy's car was in the shop, so he was driving his dad's Cadillac. At first we saw them driving, so we wanted to see where they were going. We could tell they knew we were tailing them and trying to lose us. We thought they knew it was us cause he'd seen our buddy's dad's caddy before, but when he called and sounded like he was scared, we just went with it. When they got to the house, we busted out of the car laughing and they had the most relieved look on their faces. We thought it was hilarious. Then we all went to In-N-Out. A good friend of mine asked me to take his dog to the vet to be put down. He couldn't do it because it was too stressful on him. He wanted to be there for his wife and kids but couldn't do it himself. I took his dog for him and I would do it again. I understand how hard it can be for someone to borrow my truck to get the cheese. He drives a Tahoe. I have no clue how much cheese he was getting. Called me up randomly and asked if I wanted to DP his wife with him. Specifically, both dongs in the front door. I'm married with kids. My friend needed help getting sand for some project. Sure. No problem. I get to his house and we leave in his ratty-ass late 80s Suburban. I'm thinking we're getting bags of sand at Home Depot or something. Nope. He drives us to a giant mountain of sand down by the lake that's used as ballast for freighters. But he doesn't have any buckets. So we just shovel it into the back of the Suburban. Of note, the passenger window was stuck down. Which was usually fine as it was midsummer and 90 degrees. But in this instance it just turned the truck into a sandstorm the whole ride home. The whole thing was an exercise in stupidity. 12 years after I broke up with my ex. He got cancer. He called me and asked me to move in with him so I could help him out, free rent. There are a couple problems with this scenario. 12 years. I am the least caretaking kind of person ever. Seriously. You don't want me. He was a bastard when he felt fine. I cannot imagine him when feeling terrible. I had a work commitment in another state. So I regretfully declined. Go to Doncaster, England, to pick up an ice cream van for a friend that he'd bought on eBay while he was in Australia. I said yes. And so it began. Firstly, he wired me £6,000, which I withdrew in cash to pay for it. At the time this was the most money I'd ever held, so I was a little nervous. My girlfriend then drove me down the M1 to Doncaster, and dropped me off at a house with a Pepto-Bismol pink ice cream van in the driveway. I knocked on the door and a jolly, gigantic man in dirty overalls opened the door and spent the next 2 hours with me as I learnt to strip and rebuild the Mr. Whippy ice cream machine inside the van. I was thoroughly unprepared for this. I was also unprepared for the machine exploding in my face after loading it with the minimum 4 liters of UHT ice cream mix, with slightly sour milk now liberally coating my clothes, and the light fading. The friendly ice cream giant talked me through the intricacies of starting and driving a 1973 Bedford ice cream van. The ice cream machine inside ran off the engine, rather than a generator like most do. So there was an elaborate set of linkages that transferred the engine power from the wheels to the machinery when engaged. They were also entirely exposed and directly where you would normally put your foot when driving. Lovely. The engine also didn't start on its own. You had to crack open the bonnet and spray a generous amount of combustible gas directly into the air intake before giving the accelerator a bloody good stomp. Fortunately, the FIG did this for me. He then let me drive it to the local petrol station to fill it up, during which time he also let me discover that the speedo, windscreen wipers and lights didn't really work. Oh, and neither did the fuel gauge. And, for some reason, the fuel cap was level with the tank, so you couldn't pump fuel into it more than a dribble or it all ran back out. This meant you had no real idea how much fuel was in it, but plenty to get it home, I was assured. After, sort of, filling it up, struggling to start it, and chugging home at an unknown, but very leisurely, pace, I paid him and we filled in some paperwork, at which point he let me know it was untaxed and, contrary to my friend's belief, not exempt, so I'd be breaking the law driving it home, which I now had to do, in the dark, with no real lights. Did I mention it had just started to rain? But off I set, gingerly traversing the on-ramp to the busiest motorway in the UK. Foot to the floor, wind whistling through the various holes in the bodywork. I had no idea how fast I was going, but from the waves and gestures I got from passing vehicles it definitely wasn't fast enough. I also realized I didn't know how good the brakes were, or what condition the tires were in. And it was wet, very wet, and the off-ramp was downhill, with lights at the bottom. Oh goody. Now there was smoke coming from the bonnet. By some miracle of agricultural engineering and blind faith I made it back to my flat, and parked the dreaded van in a visitor space, where it sat for the next 3 months, as I gradually ate my way through the industrial-sized box of Cadbury's flakes that were going out of date, until my building management lost their sense of humor and forced my friend to come and get it or they'd have it towed away, because once he realized he'd bought a lemon, he was in no hurry to have it become his problem. But I'd do it all again. The joy you can give kids on boring car journey by hitting the ice cream tune as they go past is brilliant. Okay, update time. Part 2. Getting rid of the van. So, now I had an ice cream van, parked outside my apartment block. My friend was very excited. But when I filled him in on exactly what he'd purchased, he was a bit less enthusiastic about it. Mainly because his original plan had been to hop on a train from Kent to Yorkshire, and drive the ice cream van back down the length of the M1, around the M25, through the Dartford Tunnel and down some windy country lanes to his house. I politely pointed out that if the van could even make that journey, it would take him the best part of a week, as he'd only be able to travel during daylight hours. The van did at best 40 miles per hour, and he shouldn't run it for more than a couple of hours a day if he didn't want it to blow up. So outside my apartments it remained. I was on good terms with the building manager, who found it quite amusing, but he did ask me to move it from a visitor space to a residence spot. My first attempt at this simply drained the battery, with the van digging its heels in like a stubborn mule. Fortunately, there was an on-site gym at our apartments, so I was able to bribe 2 burly young men to push the van to a new spot with the promise of a handful of 99 flakes. This does seem like an offer that would get you put on some kind of offenders register. But the boys happily obliged, and with the help of gravity, and possibly steroids, But definitely sugar. They got the van to roll into its new home. Roll on another month. And I had a knock on the door from the building manager. Followed by a ridiculous conversation about the Van of Doom. He'd had complaints. And pointed out that commercial vehicles weren't allowed to be stored on site. I attempted to argue that I wasn't actually using it for business. It was ice cream for purely personal or charitable consumption. But he was unmoved. I was given 2 weeks to get rid of the van. My dad cheerfully informed me that jump-starting it would be a literal non-starter. As all that would happen is it would drain the battery from any regular car but still not start. So I phoned my mate and told him he needed to book a car transporter to come and get it. Which to his credit, he did. Unfortunately, they could only pick up the Van of Doom during work hours. So I'd have to take a day off work to do it. Because nothing with this dread machine could be straightforward. Step forward. My grumpy Yorkshire father, having been briefed on the various peccadillos of the Van of Doom. He agreed to take on the task of handing it over to the car transporter chap. And I headed off to work. Later that afternoon, I had one of the most entertaining phone calls I can remember with my usually less than gregarious father. The car transporter chap had arrived, but had not been fully briefed on the situation at hand. And the van was in mood to go quietly. Firstly, they needed to start the thing, as it had to be driven from the parking space in our complex out onto the street. But the battery was dead. No problem. The C had a lovely big battery jumper that could raise the dead. All that was required was for grumpy Yorkshire father to crack the bonnet, remove the engine cover and spray highly flammable gases into the air intake whilst C turned the jumper box up to 11. And boom! The beast is alive once more. It should be plain sailing from here. All they had to do was drive the Van of Doom on the transporter and job done. Except, of course not. You see, this was a 2-level transporter. And the bottom was full. So it was going on the top. But we'd never had to park the van on a slope before. Which was a bloody good job because as C and F discovered, the handbrake was little more than ornamental. So now C had to drive it onto the trailer. And hold it in place using clutch control. Whilst F climbed up behind him and placed chocks behind the wheels. Which is something no sane man of advancing years should really be doing. But the plan worked. And they clambered off the transporter bed. Delighted to finally be done. Except, it turns out the van weighed quite a bit more than my friend had told the delivery company it did. The poor hydraulics of the transporter trailer took one go at lifting it and promptly tapped out. So now they had to clamber back into the van. Start it up. Hold it on the clutch whilst F climbed under it to remove the chocks from the wheels. Then reverse it off the trailer. Followed by all the other cars on the trailers. So that the van could go on the bottom. And then, finally, after 3 hours of leading 2 grown men on a merry dance, the van finally accepted its fate. And left Yorkshire. I think it says something about the ordeal. That my father ended his recount of it by saying, "He were a lovely chap. Worked right hard he did. So I give him 10 quid as a thank you." If you know anything about a certain generation of Yorkshire people's relationship with money, you'll understand exactly how big a gesture this was. And that, my Reddit friends, is the end of the story. God bless that ridiculous van. And all who cross its path. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.